On the night of November 13, 1989, Camas, Washington police were called to the New Liberty Theatre east of Vancouver. As per the caller, a man had attempted to carry a young boy out of the building. After the boy told his mother what had happened, her boyfriend tracked down the abductor a few blocks away. There he restrained him until the police arrived. Although the boyfriend assumed the man was a drunk, the arresting officer identified them as Wesley Dodd, a serial child molester. Little did he know that Dodd was also a serial child killer.
I kidnapped 3 little boys, 4-year-old, 10-year-old, and 11-year-old. 2 of them were raped, and then I killed all 3 of them. I didn't just go out and start killing. Everything started happening when I was just 13 years old. See, things kept progressing. I kept getting away with all these crimes while I was going to try to do a little bit more. I was enjoying what I was doing. At the time, I was laughing at them. I mean, hey, great, I could do anything I want. Anything. So that was my original reason for killing, was so that they couldn't report what I'd done, who had done it. But I wasn't sure I could kill, so in my mind I had to make that exciting. I had to fantasize about it, and to be able to kill, I had to make that thought exciting. And in a matter of just a couple of weeks, I was able to do that, and I was ready to kill. I wanted to kill. And told him, okay, there's just one more thing I want to do before I let you guys go. I pulled the knife back out of my sock, reached over and stabbed Billy near the younger one. Got him in the stomach. I didn't see the knife go in. I don't know if I felt more than saw that I'd hit him. I don't know. I knew I'd stabbed him, but wasn't sure exactly where. I knew it was in the stomach area. And then I turned to Cole and started stabbing him before he could get away. I stabbed Cole 3 times. Billy had gotten up and ran. I caught him, stabbed him 2 more times, and as I was stabbing him, as I caught him and stopped him, he told me, "I'm sorry." After all that had happened, all planning and fantasies and everything, I can't believe I actually did it. I actually killed somebody. I killed 2 little boys. And I just became obsessed with it at that point. I mean, that is all I thought about. Every minute I was awake, I had dreams about it. At work, that's all I thought about. And it was only 7 weeks after I'd murdered the 2 Near brothers that I went into Portland, found a 4-year-old boy, kind of off by himself, asked him if he wanted to play some games, have some fun. He wasn't sure about it, but I reached out my hand, and just kind of an automatic response, he reached out and took my hand. And that was it. He went with me. So I took Lee Isley back to my apartment. This was on October 29th. Immediately had him take his clothes off, tied him to the bed, took a photograph of him tied up, let him loose, told him, okay, now I'm going to teach you how to make love like grown-ups do. About 3 o'clock or so in the morning, while I was molesting him, I kind of whispered in his ear, "I'm going to kill you in the morning." I wasn't sure if he was even awake when I said it, but he kind of mumbled, "What?" And I repeated it. I said, "I'm going to kill you in the morning." And he said, "No, you're not." And I said, "Okay, I won't." I thought about tying him up and gagging him and leaving him there while I was at work. And again, the landlady might come in and find him. So I decided, well, I have to do it now. I have to kill him now. And with my right hand, I started choking him. Using the rope, I lifted him up and carried him over to my bedroom closet, pushed the clothes aside, and tied the ends of the rope around the bar in the closet and left him hanging there while I got ready for work. I started writing about cannibalism, kidnapping, moving to a different place where I could kidnap kids and keep them and use them for as long as I wanted. I'd have kept on doing it, and the things I would have done would have been even worse than murder. Hanging, that's the way I'm going to go. I'm going to hang because that's the way Lee Isley died. I don't think I deserve a neat, clean, painless little death. Actually, it's not really that I want to die as much as I know I have to, because I know I won't stop killing.
Shortly after midnight, on January 5, 1993, Dodd was granted his request to hang. Several years after the Zodiac haunted Northern California, the same region was terrorized by the I-5 Strangler, so named because his victims' bodies were found along Interstate 5 and its adjoining roads. The Strangler murdered at least 7 young women between 1977 and 1987. Unlike the Zodiac, however, the killer was eventually identified and apprehended. On May 10, 1991, 52-year-old Roger Kibbe was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of 17-year-old Darcy Frackenpole. Although a suspect in the other string of murders, it wasn't until 2000 that DNA evidence confirmed his connection. In exchange for being spared the death penalty, Kibbe agreed to help investigators locate the remains of Llewellyn Burley.
If I understand correctly, Ms. Burley was your first homicide in 1977.
77, first one.
Start at the beginning of what was going on in your life that week and that day and how this came about.
Curiosity got me.
Now, when you met her the first time, this girl, what were you thinking you might do?
I might have been thinking, can I get away with this?
And then get away with what?
Get away with her.
Well, what were you going to do? Were you going to rape her?
Have sex with her, yeah. Kidnap her, rape her, have sex, kill her.
How did you feel about killing her?
The first time I ever did it.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
I don't know. I felt bad later. I did it, thinking about it. But while it was happening, blank mind. Don't think of anything. It's like a fog.
How'd you feel about the rape part of it?
I knew what I was doing was wrong. And if it's wrong, you can't like it.
A lot of people like doing things they know are wrong.
Yeah, I'm one of them.
If you had to rate that as a sexual experience from 1 to 10, where 10's the best, how's it go?
Probably an 8. Anything below that, below 8, almost has to be on her part. I got a headache, I don't want to do it.
So would having sex with this kidnapping victim be the equivalent of pushing your wife into having sex with you even though she has a headache and says she doesn't want to?
Right.
That's about the quality of the sex for you?
Not very good for her, probably good for me.
When they asked you why you killed Llewellyn Burley, your first murder victim, you said it was just to see if it could be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's that mean?
You make a plan, see if you can carry it out, see if it can be done. That's all. It's like stacking bricks.
Do you see it as a challenge?
Mm-hmm.
So you're given the answer like, why do you climb Mount Everest?
Because it's there.
In an ironic twist of fate, the I-5 Strangler was later strangled to death by his cellmate. On March 8, 1987, Dr. Lee Lehman began what he believed to be a standard autopsy on 44-year-old John Powell. For the past year, Powell had been in a coma at Cincinnati's Drake Memorial Hospital. Just as Lehman was about to write up his cause of death, he detected the almond odor of cyanide. Suspecting foul play, the Cincinnati Homicide Squad launched an investigation into Donald Harvey, the orderly who'd found Powell dead. Although their initial conclusion was that Harvey was solely responsible for Powell's murder, he was eventually convicted for the deaths of 36 victims over 17 years.
What I was doing I thought was right. And the patients that I took care of, I like to think, I made their passing easy. They didn't have a choice, and sometimes there was no family there to make that choice for them. And I made it for them. I was being the judge and the jury and executioner. There was 15 deaths when I was 18.
There's already been 15?
No, when I went to work in the hospital, the year between I was 18 to I was 19, there was 15 deaths.
And you mentioned one time the pillowcase. What are the other methods?
I started using morphine because it wasn't controlled that much in Kentucky, especially in small hospitals in the 1970s. And I did unplug a couple of ventilators. I used cyanide, I used arsenic, I used adhesive cleaner, a plastic bag too.
Were you experimenting, or was it just whatever was available?
I wanted the quickest method of death.
Well, did you consider them victims, by the way? The patients?
No, I don't consider them. They were my patients. I never looked at it as murder till I was actually arrested. I always looked at it as mercy.
But they weren't all They weren't all mercy.
No, they weren't
all mercy.
No.
Now, the first death will occur at about 18 years of age with you. Can you tell me about that? How that happened?
Just one guy, he'd had a stroke. He had an IV in, and he got the IV out, and the sister told me to go and clean up the bed and change the IV, take it out because it was empty. And when I went to pull back the sheet, he covered me in stool within his hand, and I smothered him to death.
How did you do that?
With a pillow. I wasn't going to take any more. I mean, I'd had enough. And when he put the stool in my face was the breaking point.
You think you believe that? That's what happened?
It started me on the roller coaster, which I couldn't get off.
And what about the business with the animals?
I killed my bird. My mom told me I had to take it back because it wouldn't survive.
Yeah.
It was just a little tiny thing. And I refused to give it up, so I killed it with a hole. And I also took the neighbor man's 2 cows later on. I was about 16. I was right before I graduated from high school. I took them out into the woods and slit their throat. That was the only thing I ever did for his animals.
Do you consider yourself a sociopath?
Well, that's what most people consider me.
What do you think?
I'm just Donald Harvey.
Yeah.
I haven't changed a bit. I have been rehabilitated. I'm ready to go back to the streets.
While Harvey escaped the death penalty, he couldn't escape execution. On March 30th, 2017, the killer was severely beaten by his cellmate. In intensive care, Harvey found himself in the same position as his victims. Throughout his illustrious career, retired FBI Special Agent John Douglas met multiple killers in an effort to gain insight into their psychology. Out of everyone he interviewed, he has stated that Philadelphia resident Gary Heidnik was among the worst. The former self-anointed bishop of the United Church of the Ministers of God, Heidnik preyed on mentally impaired or mentally ill black women. But no matter his methods, his victims either left him or were taken away from him. To prevent this any longer, Heidnik constructed a makeshift dungeon, digging a 4 feet deep pit beneath his basement floor. The first victim of this torture chamber was 26-year-old prostitute Josefina Rivera. On November 25, 1986, Rivera was in dire need of money when Heidnik paid her to come to his house. As she prepared to leave, however, he abruptly choked her into submission. Naked and handcuffed, Rivera was forced into the cramped pit. Her next memory was hearing the cries of Heidnik's latest captive, 24-year-old Sandra Lindsay. Over the following months, the pair were joined by 4 other young women. Enslaved in the basement, they were raped and beaten daily. If they ever resisted, the captors revealed that Heidnik would gouge their ears with a screwdriver. Consequently, Rivera complied with his every command. In time, she earned Heidnik's trust enough that she was able to leave the house under the ruse of procuring him another victim. Instead, Rivera called the police from a phone booth. Although the officers were doubtful of her story, a search of Heidnik's basement convinced them it was the truth. Just like Rivera had told them, only 3 of the girls were still alive. Tragically, both Sandra as well as 23-year-old Deborah Dudley had been murdered for misbehaving.
How much verbal exchange did you have with the girls down there in the basement?
At first, I tried to make it nice, right?
Yeah, how did you do that, Gary?
I was holding parties there for one thing. I had a Christmas party and a New Year's party. 8, they go down in the hole in the morning, board goes over the top of the hole with the sandbags and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and then they stay down there till roughly about 8 at night. Okay, now on this particular day...
Got a radio down here, right?
Oh, yeah.
Playing real loud?
Yes.
Why is that? To drown out any noise?
Right.
In case because you're leaving the house sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah, so you don't
that was a conscious act on my part, and that was essentially the reason.
To drown out that noise, for sure.
Well, they might like a little entertainment, too. You know? Nothing was working. I was trying to find something that worked that would make them shut up to stop hollering.
So
I could stop
progressive kind of infliction of pain on these women.
I was trying to find something that would make them behave.
But it was painful to them.
I hope so. I'm sitting there, you know, trying to figure out what the hell to do, you know? What the to do, you know? I started chopping up the body.
Despite arguments that Heidnik was clinically insane, he was nevertheless sentenced to death on July 2nd, 1988. On the afternoon of May 15th, 1985, 8-year-old Rima Trexler disappeared while walking home from her Washington elementary school. Based upon a neighbor's account, the Longview girl had vanished around 2 blocks away from her house. Fearing the worst, Rima's mother asked a family friend for help. That friend was 25-year-old labourer Joseph Kondro. 14 years later, Kondro confessed to Rima's rape and strangulation. At the time of his confession, he was on trial for the 1996 murder of 12-year-old Kara Rudd.
Yeah, I knew Kara for a while. We'd play cards together and stuff.
How would you describe her person? I mean, as a kid?
She was very energetic, but she was very defiant too when she believed in things. That morning when I woke up, I knew what I was going to do. I was completely aware of what I wanted to do. I drove to the school and I pulled into the parking lot. Kara jumped in my car.
What's the exchange between you and her? And
there wasn't really much of an exchange. I just drove her out to the house, and we talked a little bit.
But happy, though, right? I mean, it's not, she doesn't know she's in danger.
No, she doesn't know she's, like I said, I was playing on my victim's trust. And that's a big thing, you know, when you do these kind of crimes, is the person has to trust you for you to lure them in.
Why a child? I mean, what's the motive behind this?
I think it's just the convenience of the situation. You know, children are very trusting, and I was very close to their family members, and you know, I played their trust.
Basically, it's an easy target.
It was an easy target at the time. Yeah.
What finally was the stressor that you're going to commit a crime, and it's going to be this child, or, you know, Rima?
It was an impulsive reaction, so I just, you know, I went down, took her down to my house, and I told her to stay in the pickup, and I went in the house. I called work and said I wouldn't be in that day, and drove her out to Germany Creek and raped and murdered her.
At what point it really kind of tipped you over where now you began to act out the fantasies?
I don't know, 13, maybe 12, 13 years old. One night, there was this girl that was working in a local neighborhood store, and I went to the store after they shut down at 11 o'clock, and I asked her for a ride, and she said sure, and she got me into her car, and, you know, I pulled a knife on her and stuff. She cried and stuff like that, and please don't do this, please don't do this, and I didn't do it. I didn't go through with it, no.
So you stopped, you felt sorry for her?
Yeah, I did.
You didn't expect her to cry, you didn't expect her to react that way?
Yeah.
And it was kind of a turn-off?
Later I overcame those, you know, feelings. My fantasy was just to rape and murder my victims. That was the whole fantasy part of it. The police department, investigations, that was part of it, but my murders, you know, they were like the high point. The fantasy is only a motivation. There's nothing better than the act itself.
Had you not been identified, would you have kept going?
Yeah.
You would have kept killing?
Yeah. I felt real comfortable about killing. I mean, killing for me was just like second nature now. I just kept on going.
No regrets back to 1985 with your first victim? Any regrets there?
No.
How about 1996?
Yeah, I would have took her out to a different spot.
So she wouldn't have been found?
Well, that was the idea. That was the intention.
13 years into his 55-year prison sentence, Kondro died of liver disease. In a final injustice, he likely took the names of his other victims with him. For 2 decades, Wichita, Kansas lived in constant fear of BTK. Then in 1991, he disappeared. 13 years later, the killer resurfaced with a successive series of cryptic communications. The 11th and final of these arrived in the form of a package. In addition to a letter, the package contained a floppy disk. Using the disk metadata, Wichita police traced it back to a computer at Christ Lutheran Church. A quick search showed that Dennis Rader was the church's president, the same name as the disk's last user. Any lingering doubt that Rader wasn't BTK was dispelled when his daughter's DNA was a familiar match to samples from 3 of the crime scenes. To his daughter, the revelation that her father was a killer was incomprehensible. The same man beloved by his family had decades earlier slaughtered one. This family was the Oteros, the first of Rader's 10 known victims. On the afternoon of January 15, 1974, 15-year-old Charlie Otero returned home to find the kitchen in disarray. Yelling to see if anybody else was present, Charlie heard his sister calling for help. Upstairs, he found her inside their parents' bedroom. From outside the doorway, Charlie could see his father's body beside the bed. His mother lay on the mattress. Both Joseph and Julie Otero had been bound and strangled. Upon the arrival of the police, Charlie told them to intercept his younger siblings before they came home. What he didn't realize, however, was that 9-year-old Joseph Jr. and 11-year-old Josie were already inside the house.
So anyway, they became a potential target.
So they were convenient.
Convenient.
How did they fuel the sexual fantasy then? Was there anything specific about that?
Mrs. Otero was attractive, and then I saw Josephine too, and the door opened. So here I am, you know. So do I just walk out the back door, they call the police, or I go for it? And I went for it. I went in, I think it was a younger Otero. They were all in the kitchen, they were making sandwiches.
Younger male or female?
No, it was the younger, the junior, Joseph. Mr. Otero actually stepped up and told him I was coming for some food. I was wanted in California, or wanted. I needed some food and water and some money and transportation. That was my ruse to kind of calm him down. He kind of laughed a little bit and he said, "Well, this is a joke. You know, who said you were my brother-in-law?" And that's probably was their demise. If they probably struggled and fought with me, that would have been a different story. But they felt fairly comfortable, so that's what I was going to do. Okay. Well, although I'm a bad guy, I care for people. You know, I have concerns for people. So. And I hadn't really crossed that path yet where I was going to kill the people yet, so I was still in concern mode. And then went in the other room and I thought, do I just leave or what? They already know me, my face, so I went back and put a plastic bag over Mr. Otero's head and put a garment over his neck and pulled up on it, and that's when it really hit the fan then, because they all could see what I was doing.
Your kids were watching this?
Yes, they were watching it. They were screaming and hollering.
Did you want to move them from the scene at all?
No.
Nothing.
I had to get in control. It was really noisy. They were screaming and
the noise was bothering you.
Yeah, the noise was bothering me, and I knew the mailman would be out there or somebody would be walking by, so I had to control it very quickly. It was just something that I had to do. Once I started with Mr. Otero, I knew I had to do all 4 of them. Sexual fantasy is if I'm going to kill a victim or do something to a victim, is have them bound and tied. Now, somewhere along the line, in my dreams, I had what they call torture chambers, and to relieve your sexual fantasies, you have to go to the kill. And I don't think it was actually the person that I was after. I think it was the dream. I know that's not really nice to say about a person, but they were basically an object. They were just an object. That's all they were. I had more satisfaction building up to it and afterwards than I did the actual killing of the person.
It almost sounds like that's something separate and apart, like a different person.
Yeah, it's part of the compartment. I can switch back and forth, and once this character takes over, whatever it is, it drives me onward.
You can't stop it.
I can't stop it. It's just, it controls me. You know, it's like it's in the driver's seat.